Hello. Welcome to this video on the impacts of digital journalism on traditional print media. In the previous video, we talked about how digital journalism has impacted the traditional process of gathering information and distributing stories. In this video, we're going to talk about how the internet specifically affected newspapers. We'll talk about how newspapers make money, how they employ people, and how they share the news. First, let's talk about the business side of print media. In the US, newspapers are a business, so they need to make money. What do they need money for? They need to pay journalists, editors, and other employees. They need to pay for paper, ink, and the machines that print newspapers. They also need to pay the people to take newspapers to people's homes every day. In the days before the internet, newspapers made money mostly through advertisements. In fact, 80% of money made by newspapers was from advertisements. Subscriptions, or money made from people who pay to read a newspaper, was only a small part of the money needed to run a successful newspaper. In the late 90s and early 2000s, more and more people started using the internet for all sorts of reasons, and businesses decided that the internet was better and a cheaper place to advertise. Between 2005 and 2009, newspaper advertising dropped 44%. This incredible drop forced newspapers to make some very difficult changes. The first area that changed because of the loss of money was staffing. Before the internet, 50% of the newspaper's budget, or the plan for spending money, was spent on paying people who worked for the newspaper. With this huge drop in advertising dollars, newspapers were forced to reduce their staff by 25%. This resulted in fewer stories on fewer topics. The newspaper just couldn't print as many stories with fewer journalists on staff. Another effect the internet had on newspapers was a change in the way people received the news. Before the internet, newspapers had teams of people who picked up the paper very, very early in the morning and then drove to neighborhoods and left a newspaper on the door of every person who had paid for it. Sometimes people sold newspapers on busy street corners or newsstands and bookstores. It cost a lot to distribute or share the news this way. Once the internet became very popular, lots of people stopped reading paper copies of the news. Instead, they went online. Internet publishers could post stories immediately. They didn't have to wait until the next day to print a story. And readers preferred to have their news quickly, too. Traditional newspapers began putting their newspapers online. This cost a lot of money to build those websites, and a lot of money they didn't have. Remember, they were losing advertising money at the time. Many newspapers had to continue printing the newspaper too. The only financial benefit to moving content online was that the newspaper could save in a few other ways. If they were distributing fewer papers, they didn't need as many drivers. They also didn't need as many materials or machines for printing. This was the only area of the newspaper business that actually saved money. To summarize, the newspapers had to make a lot of changes once the news moved from print to digital. The internet changed the way newspapers made money, employed people, and shared the news. The next video is a language-focused video on the present perfect tense. After that video, test your understanding with a game.